Welcome to the GovAI Podcast, where innovation meets governance. And each episode, we go beyond the buzzwords to explore how AI is reshaping public service. From real-world success stories to the tough lessons of adoption, we uncover the future of government, one decision at a time. AI is one of the most powerful technologies of our time, and government is still figuring out how to navigate this new frontier. Join me as we explore how AI is transforming public service, unlocking potential efficiencies, and the risks that no one's really talking about, and what happens when innovation moves faster than regulation. Today, we're joined by Benjamin Palacio, a true practitioner from frontlines of government AI. Ben is a senior IT analyst for Placer County in California, and he's been building around AI since 2018. Recently named AI 50 by the Center for Public Sector AI, and he's authored over 20 articles for GovTech, everything from chatbot architecture to AI procurement. And what makes Ben unique is his panoramic view, worked with projects on all levels of government. So really unique perspective today. We're going to be able to dive deep, but also take a step back to look at where the industry is going. Very few practitioners have this kind of landscape. So Ben, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So I'll kick it off and then maybe Dustin follow up. But I mean, we've been in this space now in AI. It seems like it's been for a long time, but really ChatGPT's only been with us for a few years. You've been playing around with chatbots from early 2018 when it was more rule-based, machine learning-based, at best deep learning. And all of a sudden, generative AI emerges where it starts to be more fluid. The applications are different. But I'm curious from your perspective, having seen this time horizon, which is really compressed, we're only talking about 7 years or so. What's been the biggest transformation and change in terms of how you've seen AI from those early days to now, and how it's being applied, and how it could be applied within government?
You know, it's interesting, an interesting topic, because at the end of the day, the base is almost the same as it was in 2018. We still have big concepts like context analysis and emotion and all these different pieces of what makes a good solution. They haven't really changed. What has changed is making them dynamic, making them automatic, and making them analyze that information in more real-time aspects. Back when we first started in 2018, a lot of it was handmade, right?
Yeah.
We had to put all of our questions and answers manually in the system. We kind of created a solution that used this concept like synonyms, right? What's a word that looks like it, just like grammatical issues, right? Where you can put things together. But now, fast forward only a few years, right? And we're able to analyze that information in a more real-time aspect. And that's the part that's changed, is having the power to be able to shift and pull that together in a split second and not having to do all the back end work. That was the part that was the headache back then.
Interesting. And as you're thinking about it now, how much of that has already been applied, or are we still in the very first innings of this?
I think we're probably midstream would be a good way to put it. We've broken ourselves away from that concept of having to hand key things on. We've moved to a place where we can automate almost anything. And to be able to do that reduces a lot of time clicking keys and pushing numbers back and forth and trying to figure out what we're doing in the first place. And then taking so long to do that we forgot. So now we can go backwards and say, okay, go make this happen. And that automation is just, it's a fundamental piece of all of it now. Not just plugging models together, but actually being able to automate when to go look at those models and figure out how are we going to get the information into the right place to analyze it. And then putting our hands around the fact that we don't have to actually do that part, because we have another LLM or agent that can do it for us.
Yeah.
That's where things are going to start getting exponentially better.
And that raises some interesting questions there. I know you've written about how AI will optimize, not replace government workers. So we think about the agent, and as you talked about, someone that's there to assist. There's still some anxiety that we hear out there, but I'm wondering kind of what you're seeing on the ground as it relates to this dynamic of automation and augmentation, and where are we at kind of with that conversation today?
That's the base of the whole problem, right? It's what's going to happen, and nobody really knows. What we do know is it's been 7 years, and guess what? We're all still here working and doing things. They might be different. I know I saw you guys at the GovAI Coalition event a few months ago, and this exact topic came up in a training session I was speaking at. And the big fact was, look at history. In 1903, the car, Ford had the car, and everybody wanted a car. And oh no, all the horses are going away. People aren't going to be there to put the shoes on them, and the jobs are going to vanish. And here we are over 100 years later, and we're still driving cars. So I think the fear is temporary. And I think we're finally getting to the point where it's not this new buzzword that everybody's talking about AI. I mean, it's been like 7 or 8 years now. We're past that. Now we're shifting into the operations and management of everything and plugging the pieces together and making it work right. Are people going to lose jobs? From a government aspect specifically, I don't see that people are going to lose jobs. It's not going to happen. What's going to happen is there's going to be a shift in what's being done and how it's being done. You're going to be able to take tasks that are picking up the phone to answer questions, and you're not going to do that anymore because an AI chatbot can do that for you. So now you can go focus on fixing the actual problems so that you can really make things happen that need to happen. And now your government tasks that used to take, I don't want to say this because I worked for the government, but but it's that stereotype of it takes forever, right? And instead of taking 2 months to get something done, it might take a couple of days, right? Because all that paperwork and table shifting of different things can be put aside and processed through systems and AI automation.
I'm curious on that. You gave the car analogy. So let's take that. We have over 100 years of retrospect from the horses all the way up to the combustion engine and moving now to electric vehicles and soon, hopefully at some point, autonomous vehicles. That timeline was really long. When we talk about AI, if you're trying to kind of predict the time horizon for how this gets adopted within government, the promise is there, right? Of, okay, government's going to be streamlined, efficiency across the board on documentation and processes. Is that something that you see as a 15, 20-year process, or things that if you're a citizen, you can expect your city to start operating in an AI forward way, we'll call it, in the next 3-4 years?
I don't necessarily think it's 3 or 4 years. And again, it all depends on what level of government. It depends on funding. There's so many variables involved. It's hard to pinpoint an exact time for everybody. It's just not going to happen. But to your point about the time period, look at the computer in the 60s. They started really getting fancier, and fast forward to the 90s, everybody wanted one, right?
Yeah.
There was a point where you didn't even have to think about it. You could sell a computer to anybody. I live in a community with a lot of retirement people, and back in the late 90s, I was selling computers, and it was this concept of all these retired grandparents wanted to do this new cool thing called email with their kids, right? So it was like selling candy to a baby. They looked at it, their eyes are like, ooh. And so now we're shipping out computers and sending computers to everybody. And the time frame got smaller, right? Instead of that 100 years, we got 30 years. And then late 90s happened when the internet came, and that's now 30 years. But things are starting to get faster. The things are changing quicker, and that's a lot based on technology. And all these different huge events happened, and all of us are still doing something. And at the end of the day, more jobs are being created than probably lost, if you look at the numbers.
Yeah, I think what would be interesting too is to kind of double click on your AI story with Placer County. So as you think about, kind of the way that you're approaching it, you've built really a recognized kind of footprint there and have quickly moved from let's just try something to having more mission critical use cases and new things that are now on resident, like citizen facing lines where they can use it. So love for you to maybe paint a little bit, about how you're approaching AI, at the county, what's kind of guiding that, and maybe a little bit of your journey along the way.
Yeah, and so the interesting part of that is if you go backwards to 2018, all of these ideas were brand new, and it was scarier because there wasn't as much knowledge about it. And people really didn't understand why we're even doing that. I was presenting one of our first chatbot deployments in 2019 to our community development. And I remember one of the ladies in the public asked the question. She said, why are you spending our money on this? Right? And you can't argue with that. I mean, it's a justifiable question. You know, what are you doing? And that was the roadblock back then. And we did it anyways. And there wasn't much money spent on it. I can tell you that right now. It was less than a car. It was not a lot. Of course, that'd be a lot now. But so anyways, the fact though is that if we didn't do that, we wouldn't know what to do next, right? And fast forward, here we are. You know, have you seen anybody without a chatbot lately? Not really. People are actually hiding them because they're so useful. It's funny. I go to a bank card place to check my account. It's like, where's the chatbot?
Yeah.
I don't even want to call anybody anymore.
We're getting into voice, agentic AI with voice AI agents, right? That are taking over as well.
Right. And the other point there is the ROI factor. When I first started working for the federal government, ROI was less of a concern. It was just, we need to do this, and we did it. But now that I work in accounting, there's a lot more public facing constituents that really want to know what's going on, and they want to know why we're doing it and what we're doing and the ROI around it. And the hard thing is to put down with a lot of these tools like the chatbot is, one, what is the ROI and how do you define that even, right? One metric is just how many questions, and you can kind of guess how much a question costs. But probably about 5 years ago, I was looking at like $5 a question. Now I'm being told it's more like 10 because of inflation or whatever. But it's just, that's one metric. But at the end of the day, there's really not a metric that can tell you what's the point of it, except for the concept of life balance. And it's almost like a utopian government. I like to say that a lot because it's, when I grew up in the 80s, if it was after 5 o'clock, forget it. And now with a bot, it has no access to the outside internet. It can't pull data from anywhere else. And that really provides it a way to say, okay, I'm giving you the best information from my point of view, right? That's a huge ROI. I mean, the fact that I can go in my backyard at 10 o'clock at night and say, hey, you know what? It'd be cool if I built a deck right here. Can I even do that? And just go to the bot and ask it, hey, can I build a deck here? And get a response of something, and not have to wait in line or set up an appointment.
You raise a point there on, you talked about external data sets. And I think one thing, I'm curious if you disagree with this, but as we start getting into more broad use cases with AI, it's going to require going outside of just the internal knowledge base of maybe a city code or something of that sort, interacting with the customer responses and providing dynamic answers. One thing that, Dustin's talked a lot to me about your work on the validation side, even from the chatbot side with HHS and a chatbot, like validating the response from there. How are you thinking about all of this? You talked about ROI as one metric, but government has a whole other set of parameters around validation, de-risking. So as you're thinking about use cases and deploying AI, how are you thinking about the considerations around validating the data, the models, the risk analysis of the use case itself, and what could go wrong?
There's a lot of things there that could go wrong. That's the whole point, right? Not letting it get there. And one thing to mention there is that it's not sustainable to check every single question, right? It just can't happen. I mean, we're only pulling down probably an average of like 150 to 200 questions a day. And even that would be a lot for one person to sit and review and check every single question. It just wouldn't be feasible. There was one I posted, I think that's what you're talking about. And the reason why I brought that one up to the department to review was the fact that it was so specific to an individual's use case. And it was multi-layered. And it just sounded like, wow, this is like really good information if it's right. And it prompted me, probably 80 or 90% of the questions I spot check them. We're going to start pulling in more people eventually to do that. But the really basic questions are pretty spot on. And there's no point to fact check every single little question like that. There's bad and good news there. The bad news is it happened. The good news is it actually triggers us to go and update content on our website, because that's the primary source of the information that gets into the chatbot.
I'm going to push a little bit back on if you were to extend outside the chatbot world, what do you do in more sensitive type of use cases where it's not website pulling wrong information, but I don't know, a police officer putting a report that was using an AI system that now hallucinated or put in wrong information? Because we're going to see that start to proliferate in those areas. So I'm curious how you think about building the security layer and architecture around that.
Yeah, the security layer up to this point has been really easy because we're able to split it, right? Public knowledge, whatever's public domain is already published everywhere. Google, all the search engines in the world can go look at it, and it's there, and there's no really a security issue there. When you start bringing in your internal systems into the mix, that's when you're going to start seeing that. And I think that's where things like data governance become extremely important. Defining, what's PII, public information, or personally identifiable information. If you can secure that at one place, it secures it everywhere. Can you be provided the wrong information? It's going to require more in-depth authentication. And you've seen that already. I mean, we started with, okay, type in a username and password, and then the years go on, and now we have MFA, and then it was kind of like only the really, really top secure type of things wanted MFA. Now I can't even go into my, shopping carts without an MFA thing. I got to have my cell phone just for that. So it's kind of, it's going to require a little more validation up front, I think, is what's going to happen.
One thing that's interesting is just, as you mentioned, the speed of change and what's happening. And, it was interesting as we were preparing for today's episode, looking at one of the chatbots you initially rolled out, Bob the chatbot, has been retired. And it's like some agencies are just getting into like chatbots, and like you've already retired one and moved to like a totally different architecture. So
I've actually retired two now.
Two. All right.
Yeah.
So, as you think about this, tell us a little bit about that, right? And then how do you kind of deal with like all these changes that are happening like right now? I mean, one of the most difficult things to do, especially in a local government, is kind of bet on the future in terms of like how infrastructure is changing, and you've managed to stay ahead of the curve and to anticipate some of those changes. So talk a little bit about this in the context of some of the work you've done with chatbots, but also any advice you have for local government agencies that are like, just when I got this figured out, then like OpenClaw comes into the forefront and I'm trying to figure out what the heck this thing is and, how it's going to impact me.
Yeah, it's really a unique situation. And thankfully to our constituents, they've not been too frustrated with our actions, right? Let's put it that way. They asked the question, like I mentioned, about the ROI, what's going on there. But looking forward, I think it's hard to explain, really. It's this thought that if we don't look at what the vision is, what's going to happen next, we're going to be behind. And that's what the steps we took. And part of it is adding more feature sets. That's a huge reason why we retired Bob Bot. The new bot can apply zoning. Well, it's pretty specific, right? So the bot actually comes back and asks you for your address. And you put your address into the bot, and it comes back with a response of what your actual zoning codes are. It even tells you who your Board of Supervisors district is and a link to their site, to that person specifically, not all 5 of them. We have 5 here in Gloucester County. And, can those details be wrong? Yes and no. No, because the data's been curated by the county and published. So it's public data. Those layers are put out in the cloud, and then the bot points to those cloud layers and pulls the information from there and can extract the information from it. It's not 100%, but it will be eventually. But if we don't push forward and add features like that, then, I think it's going to be a hard run or a sprint to try to get it done later.
That's on the chatbot front. But let's say you're talking about vendors that are coming in with their own proprietary models or trying to do kind of lock in on the data side. How do you address that challenge? You're talking about retiring one chatbot, moving to the next, but when you have one vendor coming in, switching to another as an agency, right? Public sector, how do you challenge when it comes to AI, where really a lot of them are trying to lock you in on their proprietary model or their data set that they've already trained on your knowledge base?
That's actually a different answer for different solutions, right? So in some cases, like the chatbot, the paradigm hasn't changed much. The process is still the same, and it's not going to change much because we've already defined how it works. We put our content on our website, which has over 5,000 pages of content. The bots scrape it, just like Google does for search engines or Yahoo or whoever else, and provide that detailed content to us. And that's the concept of grounding, which everybody calls it now, is defining what your data sets are. Those don't really change. So do we need to store the data? We don't even need to store it because we're already storing it on our web pages. So we just point to a new solution and we scan it. Now, if you take AI, there's two huge versions of AI categories as far as I'm concerned. One category is your direct AI, one's called indirect AI. And the direct AI is things you physically interact with, like the ChatGPT, like Claude and like Copilot, and anything with a UI, a web page or mobile app or whatever it may be. Those are direct AIs, right? Mm-hmm. We don't really control how those work. We don't control the data sets. We don't control the models outside of some enterprise level versions where it lets us use that grounding concept of, okay, don't use our web data, don't use internal data, or don't use this data, but we don't define how they work or what data they need. Then there's the indirect AI, which is like an HVAC analysis system, right? At a county, you have multiple buildings and they're all the HVAC systems are hooked together through, a certain virtual network inside your network diagram there. And basically the point there is you select one vendor to run those and they have all their data configured a certain way. And now you take that, and as we all know in government, we work on a contract basis. So after a few years, time for a new one. So the problem then is the time for the new one also causes this huge lift and labor initiative to move the data from A to B. And that's where having a more strategy on structures is going to be critical moving forward, because these systems are changing so fast. We can't afford to keep migrating data from A to B. It needs to just be the same data. So the data needs to be pulled away from that actual solution in a more general fashion so that we can just hand it to B, right? And say, here's our data, work with it.
I'll pass lead back to good data governance and all of the foundational stuff that we need to focus on. So I want to shift and talk a little bit about some of the other elephants in the room outside of data governance. You've talked about procurement, and I know this is one of those like touchy things when it comes to like procuring AI, but looking at, all of the existing things. And I think you made a really interesting point in one of the pieces that you put around adding clauses to procurement contracts to trigger security reevaluations if a vendor adds AI to a non-AI product. I mean, this is something I'm seeing and we're detecting where, all of a sudden you have an existing ERP, CRM, fill in the blank technology product. And then one day you have a software update, and that software update now gives you generative AI capabilities.
Does it, or do you know? Are you sure?
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, like, this is a real challenge. Agencies are like, we're seeing this, like we're detecting this, but like, how do you approach this? If you're a local government agency, like, what advice do you have as they think about how they procure of these types of things that, now, poof, you've got a software update. I think back to even when Tesla rolled out, their self-driving capabilities, it was a software update that went around all like the regulatory construct, because all of a sudden something that I already had new capabilities that didn't have to get approved by someone at the time.
So I can't speak specifically to how Palacio does it because I'm not in procurement. It was something that crossed my path in my mind. It's like, okay, a vendor had a solution and all of a sudden there was a line item for an AI upgrade. It wasn't an update to the AI, it was an update to the application. And all of a sudden AI came in. And this was at the beginning when AI wasn't really even considered. People were still thinking they didn't have it in their networks. And it got to a point where it said, if you think that, you're wrong, because everybody in the United States has AI in their network now. There's no way around it. We have vendors that process email for us to do spam filtering. They're using AI and we didn't even know it. Matter of fact, some vendors I contacted like 5 or 6 years ago because I figured out they had AI in their tools, and the salespeople didn't even know it. It was a little bit different now, but back then it was so new that even some of the vendors didn't even have an understanding of it.
I think to your point, it's embedded right now, and pretty much every software provider is putting it in, whether they're admitting it to it or not. You're going to find it on the back end of any one of those software systems.
Well, and that's why it's a little bit easier on the initial procurements, because it's part of the security checklist we have to ask about it. Even if you don't say it, we're going to ask you to answer the question. We're going to challenge you. We're going to say, hey, do you have AI? Oh, you do? Okay. And it might trigger some other information that we need to know about.
So I want to end, we've dived deep here, and I want to now take the step back with our last question. And for our listeners, looking ahead, 2026, but even beyond the next few years, getting your wisdom of having been in this space for a while, give us some tangible, we'll call it guesses, of where you see AI going on a practical level in terms of where it's being used, whether it's agentic AI. Where do you see some of the pitfalls, and what are some of the things that you're thinking about or concerned about that maybe is not on everyone's radar right now that we should be thinking about?
It's interesting, this whole process. The scary part is getting the information out to the bad guys, right? And that one aspect of it, I think, has been really, really thought hard about this time around. Historically, it hasn't been thought about. You hear about, oh, there's a list of this out on the internet. There's a list of that out on the internet. Or even back in the 80s, it's like, oh my gosh, they got the list. We even have it in movies, right?
Yeah.
They got the list of all the secret agents. Oh no. But I think one thing that makes me feel a little bit more warm and fuzzy inside is the fact that people are more concerned about their information now than ever. And that makes us handle it better up front. And if you handle it before it goes out the gates, there'll be less problems. And I think the global aspect of it, that one fact, is going to make everything easier.
Absolutely. Well, lots for us to think about, Ben. I want to thank you. This has been incredibly valuable, and really thankful to have a practitioner who's actually been deploying AI for many years now join us and share some of the wisdom. And for the listeners, we'll put in the show notes, the GovTech articles, the many GovTech articles that you've written, Ben, and then also a little bit about the chatbot in Placer County that you've put in place. But thank you again for joining us, the GovAI Podcast. Look forward to more discussions.
Thank you, Noam. It's been great.